The link between substance use and psychosis, it seems pretty simple, right? One must cause the other. But what if I told you that's a really dangerous oversimplification? Today, we're going to unpack this whole complicated relationship and find out why getting it right can literally be a matter of life and death.
And I'm not being dramatic. This isn't just some theoretical debate. When we misunderstand this link, there are tragic, real-world consequences. Just look at the case of Christopher Clunas in London. A public inquiry found this huge fatal error. His psychotic symptoms were just dismissed, written off as a side effect of his drug use. And that misjudgment, it led to a total breakdown in his care, and the results were devastating. It's a really stark reminder of just how high the stakes are here.
So that brings us to the real heart of our investigation today. What is the true nature of this relationship? Is a drug a direct cause? Is it a trigger for something that was already lying dormant? Or is it just another complicating factor in a much bigger picture? Let's follow the evidence and see what we can find out. Okay, so our first clue lies in a really critical distinction. See, not all psychosis that shows up alongside drug use is the same thing. Clinicians face this major challenge. They have to figure out if they're looking at a psychosis directly induced by a substance or a primary psychotic disorder, like schizophrenia, that's just happening at the same time as a substance use.
And that brings us to our key term, substance-induced psychosis, or SIP for short. Now, this is way more than just a bad trip. It's a specific condition where psychotic symptoms, delusions and hallucinations, are kicked off by a substance. But, and this is the really crucial part, they stick around for days or even weeks after the substance is totally out of the person's system.
So this is where the diagnostic puzzle starts to get really interesting. With SIP, you often see this sudden dramatic onset filled with vivid hallucinations and really intense emotions, like total euphoria or sheer terror. Primary schizophrenia, on the other hand, usually develops way more slowly, and it's often characterized by things like disorganization and what clinicians call negative symptoms, stuff like pulling away from friends and family or losing motivation. All right, now that we kind of get the distinction, let's dive deeper into the specific substances that can act as these chemical triggers. And you might be surprised to see how different drugs can paint completely different pictures of psychosis.
So let's start with the classic culprits, stimulants, like amphetamines and cocaine. Their power to induce psychosis is super well documented. We've known about it for decades.
In fact, the psychosis that's triggered by high-dose amphetamines can look so much like acute paranoid schizophrenia that it's actually been used by researchers as a model for the condition. The experience is often just filled with this intense paranoia and these really bizarre tactile hallucinations, like that infamous feeling of cocaine bugs crawling under your skin. Okay, next up is cannabis. This is a substance that is right at the center of one of the most complex and, honestly, one of the most heated debates in all of modern psychiatry. Now, here's what makes cannabis so different. Unlike stimulants, which mostly just mimic those positive symptoms like hallucinations, cannabis can actually trigger a much wider range of symptoms, including the negative ones and the cognitive problems you see in schizophrenia. And the evidence is really piling up. For some vulnerable people, cannabis can be the tipping point, and for those who already have a diagnosis, it can make their condition much worse. Right, now let's talk about hallucinogens. It's a really common mistake to just lump them all together, but when you look at their connection to psychosis, well, they couldn't be more different. And this is a super important distinction. PCP, a lot like cannabis, can induce a state that is a very close mirror to schizophrenia, complete with those negative and cognitive symptoms. LSD, though, that's a whole other story. While it can definitely trigger a profound, disorienting experience, there's just no solid evidence that it can cause a lasting psychotic disorder in someone who doesn't already have some pre-existing vulnerability. But the triggers aren't just illegal substances. A state of toxic psychosis, which is basically a severe delirium, can also be brought on by something you might get right from your doctor, prescribed medications. This kind of psychosis is really marked by severe confusion and a breakdown in thinking, and it can be triggered by a whole range of common medications, especially in vulnerable people like the elderly. This really highlights a key theme for us. The substance is only one part of the story. The person's own biology plays a huge role. So we've seen that all sorts of substances can trigger psychosis, but this leads us to a massive question, a real twist in our investigation. If these drugs are the trigger, why doesn't everyone who uses them develop psychosis? The answer shows us that the substance is only half the story. It's a simple question, but it's a profound one. If stimulants or cannabis are the spark, why do some people catch fire while others are totally fine? Well, it turns out the answer isn't really in the drug itself, but in the unique makeup of the person who's taking it. I want you to imagine it this way. The drug is the spark, but our individual risk factors, that's the kindling. Some pretty groundbreaking research has actually pinpointed a specific gene variant that makes people more susceptible to the psychotic effects of cannabis. And you add in a family history of schizophrenia, or pre-existing social challenges, or starting to use substances at a young age, and you're just piling on the kindling, making it way more likely that a single spark is going to set off a full-blown fire. And all of this brings us to the final stage of our investigation, the verdict. With all this complexity, how in the world do clinicians arrive at a diagnosis that is going to shape a person's entire treatment and, hopefully, their recovery? And let's be clear, this isn't just some academic distinction. Getting this right is absolutely 100% critical for effective treatment and for a person's path to recovery. Reaching the right diagnosis is this really meticulous process. It's like a detective's investigation. Clinicians have to gather a detailed history of substance use, they have to pinpoint the timeline of when symptoms started versus when drug use started, and they have to rule out all the confusing effects of just being intoxicated or going through withdrawal. And then, finally, they have to corroborate the patient's story with family members and with their own clinical observations to piece together the whole picture.
So where does that leave us? Well, we've discovered that psychosis is not a simple story of cause and effect. Not at all. It's this incredibly complex dance between a chemical trigger and our own unique biology. And that raises a really profound question. If our risk is written in our genes just as much as it's shaped by our choices, how does that change everything we think we know about mental health, about prevention, and about the very nature of compassion?